welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT patch rundown video. Today we'll be diving into the newest patch 10.17 and all the changes that come with it. Overall, this patch is much smaller than usual, as it's much more of a micro patch with subtle changes to nudge the meta slightly. While there's only a few changes here, we're going to talk about each of them and what they mean for the meta. Let's get to it. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright folks, let's get back to the video, and to begin, we've got some system changes. As 10.17 is a smaller patch than usual, the only system changes that we have this week to go over are about galaxies. Before we talk about the new galaxy being added, we need to mention that there's a galaxy being removed, Binary Star. Binary Star was not received very well ever since it was originally added in the game, so most players are happy to see it gone in 10.17. There have been a lot of ups and downs in terms of galaxies, with some being successful and others clearly not working. A common theme for some of the less well-received galaxies is that they take away player choice in some capacity. Binary Star was one of the remaining galaxies that did that, so it's good to see that they've removed it. Next on the chopping block is likely Dwarf Planet, as it's also disliked due to it limiting player positioning. Now, on to the new. The new galaxy being added in 10.17 is Manatee's Delight. This galaxy makes it so each player receives a spatula component at the start of the game. In previous metas, more so in set 1 and set 2, having an early spatula like this could be disastrous. There were many different metas where a spatula was all a player needed to make their way into one of the strongest builds. Thankfully, set 3 hasn't really had that issue. Sure, there's been a few times where having a spatula has certainly made builds stronger, like Demolitionist Kaisa, but overall the balance surrounding the spatula items has been quite good. That said, having everyone start with a spatula may make games a bit crazy. Some of the more common uses of spatula will be Blade Master Zed in Slash Bros, Infiltrator Aurelia in Cybernetics, turning a champion into a rebel for 6 rebels, and turning various champions into a protector. Basically, there's a lot of viable ways to use the spatula, which should make this galaxy interesting to play. As mentioned, the better galaxies tend to give players more choices, and starting with a spatula gives players a lot of potential choices. Overall, it should be a very fun galaxy. Let's move on and talk about the only trait changes this week, which is to snipers. There's likely a case to be made for more balanced changes to traits right now in the meta, but they've chosen to only nudge snipers slightly. The change is to their damage bonus per hex, as it's going down to 9-16% from 10-18%. It's definitely not a big change, but there's a few things to talk about regarding it. First, was it actually needed? Astro Sniper was certainly a strong build, but it has its downsides that prevent it from being too dominant. And as far as the build goes, it's not strong due to the sniper trait, more so the champions of Astro plus the damage of Jin. Outside of this build, you really don't see a lot of snipers, especially not 4 snipers. The champions within the trait don't even really need the extra damage that the trait provides. Sure, it's nice having bonus damage for Jin, but he does a crazy amount of damage without it, as does Teemo. None of the snipers are relying on the trait itself, so it's odd that it actually got nerfed. Again, it's a small nerf, so it doesn't really change much, but it is an interesting place to target nerfing Astro Sniper if the worry is that the build is too good right now. Okay, let's move on and talk about champion changes. Most of the patch is focused on small tweaks to champions, so let's go over each of them and see what it may change for the meta in 10.17. Up first, for the 1-cost champions, we have Jarvan. Jarvan is losing a little bit of armor as it's going down to 40 from 45. It's small, but it's enough to make him a bit less of a tank. His value as a frontliner was never really about the armor, it's about the shield from Protector mixed with the health of Warmogs. Having less armor doesn't really matter in regards to those two things, so this nerf really won't do much for Jarvan. With no changes to Warmogs or Protectors, he's still poised to be an incredibly strong early game frontline option if you're able to 2-star him, have a Warmogs, and another Protector. The next 1-cost champion is Poppy. Her magic resist is going up to 35 from 30. It's a nice change to try to keep Poppy relevant longer in the game, as well as help her against early game Ziggs or Twisted Fates. But it is not going to be a huge increase, so while it is going to be helpful, it's overall not that impactful. It does mean that if you're playing a composition with Poppy later in the game, like, say, Star Guardian Sorcerer, and have Mystic, then Poppy will overall be better against magic damage. This should make her a better frontline for that build, which is great, except it's not really enough to prevent burst damage from killing her, nor does it actually help more against physical damage. The change is nice, but unlikely to affect her place in the game by any significant amount. Moving along along, we've got a buff to Blitzcrank. Blitzcrank is going to now have 60 armor, up from 45. That is a lot of armor, especially for a brawler which relies more on health to tank than other forms of damage mitigation. It's also nice to see some changes for Blitzcrank, as he's been relatively untouched throughout set 3, only receiving minor changes here and there. Ultimately though, how much will increased armor matter for Blitzcrank? It'll help him if he's in the front line for sure, but oftentimes he's kept in the back line, so whichever champion he pulls is killed by the carry. We'll have to see how this change plays out and whether or not players will start putting him in the front line more than previously. Cassiopeia is up next as she's getting a decent buff to her 3-star variation. The damage of her spell is going up to 3,500 from 3,000. Normally would sit here and say 3-star changes are overall not that relevant, but for most 3-cost champions, it's fairly common to see them get 3-starred if they're a carry. Cassiopeia is no exception to that, as she's the main carry for Vanguard Mystic and is commonly 3-starred in that build. In fact, one of the win conditions is 3-starring her, so it's an interesting choice for them to buff her. Overall, this may just be targeted to get players gunning for Vanguard Mystic more and to chase the 3-star Cassiopeia when they do play that build. To no one's surprise, we're seeing a nerf to Master Yi in 1017. The damage of its ability is going down to 70, 95, 145 from 75, 100, 150. Sure, it's not a big nerf, but anything to lower his absurd damage is going to be good. Slash Bros is definitely a volatile build, so you're not always going to see it win games, but it certainly has been one of the stronger builds when you get everything that you need for it. This nerf should help lower the power that Master Yi gets when he's initially 2-starred, as well as lower the ridiculous power spike he gets at tier 3. Don't worry though if you're a fan of running this build, as it's not a large nerf, so he'll still be playable in 1017. Interestingly enough, we have a nerf to Neeko. Her ability damage at tier 3 is going down to 450 from 500. While it's only 50 damage, it is an interesting change, as Neeko 3 isn't exactly overpowered. Not to mention, it's rare to see her even get to tier 3 outside of Star Guardian Protector. Most likely this nerf is meant to address said build, as she is one of the late game win conditions for it. Whether it was needed or not is up for debate, but probably is a bit unnecessary. And the last 3-cost champion receiving a change is Shaco. His armor is going down to 20 from 25. Normally changes that are only by 5 in one direction or another aren't too impactful, but only having 20 armor is going to be noticeable for Shaco. Mainly due to the fact that when he jumps into the backline, he gets targeted early, so he'll be taking extra damage with this armor nerf. Is it enough to make him unplayable? Well, probably not, at least against magic-heavy comps. Against physical damage carries like Jhin or Vayne, he may not do as well as he used to, making him a weaker counter to those champions. The only 4-cost champion getting a change this week is Riven. First up is her health, which will now be 850 up from 800. Next up is her magic resist, as it's going from 20 up to 30. And the last change is a small bug fix to her auto attack speed ratio. The first two changes are relevant ones, so let's focus on those. Giving Riven more health is great. Right now, she's been relegated to the side for most builds to provide her traits, and she hasn't really taken the center stage for the last few patches. With increased health and magic resist, we may see her back in the front line for sorcerers, or at least a more relevant carry for other builds. With that said, one of her weaknesses is the champions like Jhin that can burst her or heavy CC. Neither of these changes are going to help against that, other than the fact that she may live a bit longer than before. She's definitely going to be better in compositions she's played in, but the jury's still out as to whether Riven will return as a proper carry. Of course, we all expected a nerf to Gongplank. They just had to do it, right? His late game damage was absurd in 1016, so to address that, they've lowered it from 550, 700 to 525, 675. As with most of today's changes, it's not a huge change, but they're really trying to find a sweet spot for Gongplank. Considering he went from borderline unplayable to incredibly strong with just one buff of 100 damage, it's definitely a good idea for them to nerf him by a small amount. If anything, it may be worth doing a hotfix to lower his damage by another 25 if he still proves to be too strong in 1017. But we'll have to see how the initial change plays out. Hopefully it brings his damage down enough so that he's viable without feeling overpowered. And the last champion receiving changes for 1017 is Xerath. It is great to see him get a bit of love, as he's been one of the weakest 5-cost champions for the last few patches. To help him, they've buffed his spell in 2 ways. First, the damage is going up to 320, 440 from 300, 400. The second change is to his splash damage, as it's now 8110 from 75100. Both of these changes should push Xerath back into the late game carry role. While he has been one of the weakest options, he wasn't exactly unplayable, especially when you paired him with Janna or gave him an item like a Rage Blade. These buffs should help him be better in those situations, as well as an overall viable option as a late game play. There's one last section to go over, and that's the items. There's only 2 items being changed this week, and the first is Titan's Resolve. The item's maximum stacks are going down to 25 from 50. As there's no other information in regards to this change, it should mean that the item gets stacked much earlier, and thus the champion wearing it gets the bonus armor and resistance faster than before. It does come at the price, as the increased armor and magic resist is likely lower due to there being less stacks, as well as the bonus damage since it's only going up to 25. This should make the item usable for more frontline champions in general, while weakening its strength on mech and mech builds. It also may just make the item unplayable, as it was already niche, and with it being worse on mech, it may disappear from the meta entirely. And the second item getting changed is Hand of Justice. The healing is going down to 45% from 50%. It's a great change, as this item was definitely just a little bit too strong as they changed it in 10.16. This should make it just a little bit less potent while still maintaining its relevance in the meta. And that is going to be it for today, folks. While 10.17 is a small patch, it's still got enough changes to affect the meta. But don't expect the meta to shift too much until we get a larger patch, which will hopefully happen with 10.18. Let us know in the comment section below what you're most excited for with the new patch. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.